The night smelled of grilled steak, expensive wine, and betrayal. I was standing on the patio, a tray balanced in my hands, when my husband's voice floated through the open French doors. "This joke of a marriage won't survive another year. She's nowhere near my level." Laughter followed, deep, satisfied, masculine laughter, the kind that carries the arrogance of power. I didn't move. My fingers tightened around the tray until the metal dug into my palms. Through the glass I saw them, Dominic and his 3 loyal companions, sitting comfortably on the outdoor furniture I had chosen, drinking wine from my collection, enjoying food I had cooked. They were surrounded by the home I had built, celebrating my humiliation as if it were a sport. Nathan leaned forward, patting Dominic on the back, while Marcus smirked and raised his glass. Trevor, ever the sycophant, poured another round of my vintage Bordeaux, the one I had been saving for our anniversary. They looked perfectly at home in my world, a world funded, furnished, and sustained by me. For a few still seconds, I watched them like an outsider, like a ghost at her own funeral. And then Dominic spoke again. "She's been insufferable since landing the Morrison account, walks around as if she single-handedly saved the company." The Morrison account, the one I had fought for through 17 meetings and countless sleepless nights while he played golf in Palm Springs. The deal that had saved our agency and made us profitable. The deal that turned his last name into a respected brand. I stood frozen, realizing how easily he twisted truth into mockery. The man who once cried over his failed startups was now ridiculing the person who had carried him through each disaster. The crypto platform that vanished, the meal kit company that never launched, the meditation app no one downloaded. Every failure had been paid for with my savings. They were all laughing about it now. Dominic lifted his glass, his grin sharp as a blade. "I've been documenting everything," he said proudly. "Every time she makes a decision without me, every time she undermines my authority. My lawyer says I'll get at least half the company." Half. Half of the empire I built while he played visionary. Something inside me went very still. "Before we continue, thank you for being here and following Ruby's story. If you believe that no one should ever be diminished for their success, subscribe. It's free and helps amplify voices like hers." I placed the tray down on the table beside me, pushed open the glass doors, and stepped into the golden light of the patio. The laughter stopped instantly. 4 faces turned toward me, caught, guilty, afraid. I smiled faintly. "Why wait a year?" I said. My voice was calm, detached, perfectly controlled. "Let's end this farce tonight." For a moment, silence held the air taut. Nathan's mouth fell open. Trevor pretended to check his phone. Marcus muttered something and stepped backward. But Dominic, my husband of over a decade, simply stared at me. His arrogance evaporated, replaced by the stunned emptiness of a man realizing the audience has changed. Without another word, I turned and walked back into the house. My heels struck the floor with deliberate rhythm, the sound of something breaking cleanly in two. In our bedroom, I pulled out the suitcase I'd bought as a gift to myself after our first $1 million deal. I packed it with calm precision: suits, blouses, the jewelry I'd earned, the handbags that symbolized my independence disguised as luxury. Each folded item was a memory of the nights I'd worked while he slept, the mornings I'd carried both our dreams and our debts. From the bathroom, I gathered my skincare bottles, the quiet rituals that had kept me sane through years of emotional erosion. I moved without hesitation, because hesitation had— "Ruby, please," Dominic's voice cracked in the doorway. "Can we talk?" "There's nothing to discuss," I said, zipping my case shut. "You've made your feelings clear. I'm beneath you. Our marriage is a joke. You've already hired a lawyer to take what I built." He blanched. "How do you know about—" "The same way I know about your hidden account," I interrupted. "The same way I know you've been telling people I'm unstable." A shadow moved behind him. Nathan. The guilt on his face told me everything. "You sent me that message," I said quietly. "The warning about Thursday nights." Nathan nodded. "I couldn't watch it anymore," he murmured. He was turning into someone unrecognizable. Dominic's rage snapped like glass. You warned her?" "Yes," Nathan said simply, "and I'd do it again." The silence that followed was pure, sharp, and final. I closed my suitcase, lifted it from the bed, and looked at the man who had once promised forever. "I'm sorry for the years I wasted believing in you," I said, "but I won't waste another day." And then I walked out, past the photos, past the noise, past the life that had already ended without my consent. The door closed behind me with a softness that felt louder than any scream. Each step down the staircase echoed like punctuation in the sentence ending our life together. By the time I reached the front door, my breath had steadied. Clarity had a strange calmness to it, the kind that arrives when pain finally burns itself out. Outside, the air was cool and clean. The city shimmered in the distance, indifferent to my unraveling. I pulled my suitcase across the marble porch, the wheels whispering against the stone. Behind me, voices rose, Dominic's anger twisting into something desperate. Then silence. He didn't follow. He knew he'd lost the audience. The valet at the hotel recognized me instantly. Businesswomen in tailored suits always stand out among tourists and tired travelers. "Executive suite for a week," I told him, under Morrison. He didn't ask why my hair was undone or why I was wearing diamond earrings with a travel coat. He just nodded, took my bag, and handed me a keycard. The elevator ride felt endless, rising through floors of quiet anonymity until the doors opened onto a polished hallway, smelling faintly of cedar and new beginnings. The suite was sleek, sterile, impersonal. Exactly what I needed. No memories clinging to the furniture, no ghost of laughter or lies. I set my phone on the marble counter. It began buzzing immediately, Dominic's name flashing again and again. First came the anger. "You're being dramatic. Come back before you ruin everything." Then the manipulation. "You misunderstood. I was just venting. We can fix this." Then the false apology. "I didn't mean it that way. You know I love you." And finally, the threats. "If you make a scene, investors will walk. You'll destroy the company we built." We. Even his apologies were thefts. I turned the phone face down, undressed, and stepped beneath the hotel shower. The water poured over me in endless heat, washing away the scent of smoke, betrayal, and the life I'd just abandoned. For 12 years, 12 long, deliberate years, I had built a home, a company, a marriage. And now, with one overheard conversation, it all dissolved like sugar in scalding water. The tears came slowly, almost methodically. Not sobs, but a quiet release of everything I'd been holding together. The exhaustion, the disbelief, the humiliation of realizing that while I was fighting for us, he was documenting my downfall. I stayed under the water until it ran cold, until my reflection in the fogged mirror no longer looked like a wife, only a woman reborn in the ashes of her own naivety. Wrapped in a towel, I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city glittered below, steady, merciless, alive. That view reminded me of who I was before him, the girl who believed ambition was not a flaw, but a compass. The woman who had built her first client base from a second-hand laptop and a coffee shop Wi-Fi signal. I ordered dinner not because I was hungry, but because I needed to remind myself I still existed outside his narrative. Salmon instead of steak, white wine instead of bourbon, and a small chocolate soufflé, because Dominic used to call dessert unnecessary indulgence. I ate every bite. At 9 p.m, my lawyer answered on the second ring. Patricia Winters, sharp mind, colder patience, and exactly the kind of woman men like Dominic feared. "I've been expecting your call," she said simply. "You already know?" "Let's just say your husband's name has been circulating. One of his friends reached out 2 hours ago, a Nathan Blackstone." I froze. "Nathan called you?" "He did. He's ready to testify if needed. He has copies of messages, financial transfers, everything. Meet me at 8 tomorrow. Bring any records you have, business or personal. We'll protect what's yours." When the call ended, I spent hours at the small desk, organizing digital folders, the kind of meticulous structure that had once made our company thrive. Folder 1, Dominic's failed ventures, the crypto losses, the meal kits that never shipped, the meditation app that never reached beta. Folder 2, client contracts, every proposal, every late-night email, every signature that carried both our names but only one person's effort. Folder 3, financial manipulation, evidence I would soon possess once Nathan delivered his proof. Sometime after midnight, a knock startled me. Through the peephole, I saw him, Nathan, holding 3 cardboard boxes stacked in his arms, his face pale and tired. When I opened the door, he entered without speaking, setting the boxes down carefully on the coffee table. "I'm sorry," he said finally. His voice carried the weight of months of guilt. "I know it means nothing now, but I should have stopped him." "Then why didn't you?" I asked. At first I thought it was harmless talk. Men brag, complain. But then he started keeping records. He called it a project. Project Gaslight. He said he was documenting your instability so he could take the company cleanly. I opened the first box. Inside were folders labeled in Dominic's handwriting: financial discrepancies, emotional evidence, asset division. Emails printed and annotated, twisting every normal conversation into proof of some imagined failing. A note about me working late became neglecting the marriage. A budget correction became control issues. It was all there, the script he'd written for my destruction. I looked at Nathan. His face was gray with shame. "He even asked us to help," he confessed. "Marcus tracked your social media. Trevor watched who you met for lunch. I was supposed to report on how the staff reacted to you, whether they respected you or feared you. He wanted to build a pattern." I sat back, the room spinning softly around me. "How long?" "Since January," Nathan said, "right after you signed the Samsung deal. That was when he stopped pretending to be your partner." I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. Of course, the moment my success outgrew his ego. He looked down, unable to meet my eyes. "I'm done being part of it, Ruby. I brought everything. His notes, his screenshots, even a draft for a new company he was forming behind your back." I stared at the boxes, the physical weight of betrayal sitting between us like a corpse. Somewhere in the city, Dominic was probably pacing the house, realizing the story he'd built was crumbling faster than he could rewrite it. And for the first time that night, I felt something dangerously close to peace. The city outside my window was still asleep when I finally stopped reading. Paper after paper, screenshot after screenshot, each one a thread in the web my husband had spun to strangle me. I had spent half the night scanning, labeling, and archiving every piece of his deceit. The glowing laptop screen was the only light in the suite, reflecting against the wineglass beside me, untouched and forgotten. At 3 a.m, my phone buzzed again. A number I didn't recognize. "Ruby?" The voice was female, shaky, unfamiliar. "Yes?" "This is Linda, Trevor's wife." I hadn't spoken to her more than a handful of times at dinner parties, always polite small talk about vacations or recipes. Now her voice was trembling. "He came home drunk tonight," she said. "Told me everything, about the meetings, about what they said, about how Dominic planned to take the company. I'm disgusted. You need to know, I have recordings." "Recordings?" "I started taping him weeks ago. He thought it was all a joke, bragging about how Dominic had it all figured out. I'll send them to your lawyer." "Ruby, I'm filing for divorce, too." For a long moment after she hung up, I just sat there staring at the phone. The circle was breaking. One woman at a time, the truth was bleeding through the cracks of their loyalty. At 4, Nathan left the suite, exhaustion hollowing his eyes. Before he closed the door, he turned back to me. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "you would have carried him forever, if he'd only been grateful." When the door clicked shut, silence reclaimed the room. A deep, clean kind of silence that tasted like resolve. I showered again, dressed in a crisp black suit, and tied my hair back. Patricia's voice came through the phone as I walked toward the elevator. "The injunction's ready," she said. "By the time Dominic wakes up, he'll be legally barred from accessing company accounts. You'll walk into that meeting protected." "Thank you," I whispered. "You don't need luck, Ruby. You just need to keep breathing." The early morning streets shimmered with rain as my taxi carried me toward the office building I had built from nothing. It looked different in the half-light, not just glass and steel, but the shape of every risk I'd ever taken. Security nodded as I entered. They'd seen me here at impossible hours for years. They knew who built this empire and who merely signed his name beside mine. The conference room smelled faintly of coffee and fear. Nathan was already there, sleeves rolled up, setting up evidence stations around the polished oak table. Contracts, emails, screenshots of Dominic's Project Gaslight chats. "We'll let him speak first," Nathan said. "He'll try to turn this into a personal issue. You let him dig his own grave." At 8, Sarah arrived, laptop under one arm, loyalty burning in her eyes. "Half the staff is ready to testify," she said. "The rest are watching quietly, but they know the truth." I nodded. "That's enough." By 9, the board began filing in. Margaret Chin, sharp as a scalpel. Robert Kim, all business. David Aon Quo, who rarely spoke but saw everything. Even James Harrison, our biggest client, had been invited as an observer. Patricia entered last, calm, composed, lethal. She gave me a small nod that felt like armor being fitted. At precisely 10, Dominic arrived. The sight of him made the room's temperature drop. He wore the navy Tom Ford suit I'd bought him for our 10th anniversary. His tie was perfect, his cologne expensive, his confidence brittle. He smiled, the salesman's smile that used to charm investors and now fooled no one. "I appreciate everyone gathering on such short notice," he began, taking the seat across from me. "There's been a bit of confusion lately regarding leadership, but I assure you, despite my wife's—" "Stop there," Margaret interrupted, her voice slicing through his monologue. "We've reviewed the documentation." For the first time, I saw fear flicker in his eyes. "What documentation?" "The one showing that your accusations of instability were fabricated," she said evenly. "That you created false evidence, organized under something called Project Gaslight." I clicked the remote, and the first slide appeared on the screen. His own message, enlarged in crisp clarity. "Keep documenting everything. We need to show a pattern, even if we have to create it." Dominic went white. "That's taken out of context," he sputtered. "Nathan's twisting things. He's trying to—" Nathan stood. "My only agenda," he said firmly, "is truth. For months, I watched you dismantle the woman who built this company while you played the visionary." Dominic's mask cracked. "You were part of it," he snapped. "You encouraged me." "Yes," Nathan said simply, "and now I'm helping to end it." I advanced to the next slide, 2 columns of figures, blue and blank. "Over the past 2 years," I said, my voice steady, "I've closed 17 major contracts, generating over $30 million in revenue. Mr. Morrison has closed none." James Harrison leaned forward, his voice like a verdict. "Let's be clear. My company works with you, Ruby. Dominic's presence in meetings was tolerated, not required." The color drained from Dominic's face. His hands trembled against the polished wood. I clicked again. The final slide filled the screen. The registration document for his shadow company, Morrison Strategic Solutions, designed to steal our clients. Patricia folded her hands. "As of this morning, the injunction is in place. Mr. Morrison is suspended from all operational authority pending full review." Silence. Then the scrape of his chair as he stood, slow and shaking. "You can't do this," he whispered. "I already did," I said. He looked at me, not with anger, not even hatred, but disbelief, as if the woman standing before him, calm and untouchable, was a stranger he'd underestimated too many times. When he finally left, the door closed behind him like the end of the city lights reflected in the glass, 1,000 small fires burning in the darkness. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I let myself smile. Not the smile of victory, but of freedom. Sharp, quiet, and real. By the time the meeting ended, the air in the boardroom felt lighter, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. I stayed seated for a moment after everyone left, staring at the empty chair across from me, the one Dominic had filled with arrogance and charm for so many years. Now it was just a chair, stripped of meaning, waiting for someone worthy to occupy it. Patricia touched my shoulder gently. He'll call, beg, maybe threaten again. Don't respond. Let the paper trail speak for you. I'm done responding, I said quietly. When she left, I walked through the office halls I had once shared with him. Everything looked the same. The framed awards, the sleek desks, the glass walls. But the energy was different. My employees looked up as I passed, eyes wide with cautious hope. Some nodded respectfully. Others smiled. A few whispered my name as if reminding themselves who the true leader had always been. In my office, I closed the door and leaned against it, letting exhaustion catch up. The battle had been won, but the war, the quiet internal one, had just begun. How do you rebuild trust after discovering your husband spent half a year crafting your destruction? How do you look at your reflection without seeing the blind spots that let him thrive in your shadow? The answer, I decided, was simple. You start from zero, and this time, you never apologize for your own brilliance. That night, my phone lit up again, but it wasn't Dominic. It was Sarah. An hour later, Barbara Fitzgerald, one of the city's most connected socialites, called me directly. "I was there, darling," she said, voice dripping with disapproval. "He's been coming every afternoon, telling anyone within earshot that he built your company. Today he claimed Apple tried to buy his meditation app. People laughed. He didn't notice." I thanked her and ended the call. The truth didn't need my defense anymore. It was defending itself. The next morning brought new headlines in the local Business Digest. Morrison Digital undergoes leadership transition amid allegations. The article was cautious, factual, my name mentioned with professionalism, his with scandal. Investors called to confirm continuity. Clients called to express support. The silence from Dominic's side was telling. By the third day, he had become a ghost wandering through rumors. Some said he'd left the city. Others saw him sitting alone at the club, nursing the same drink for hours. Then came the unexpected message from Emma Rodriguez, Marcus's girlfriend. Her email began with a single line, "You deserve to see what they were planning." Attached were screenshots of private messages. Dominic and Marcus discussing how to approach our clients after the divorce, how to suggest I had suffered a breakdown, how to lure key employees away with promises of stability. They had even designed mock logos, nearly identical to ours, changing only a single word. The list of employees they hoped to recruit was annotated with cruel precision. Next to Sarah's name, "Single mother, will follow security." Next to Kevin, my lead developer, "Eager for promotion, easy to sway." Predators dissecting loyalty as if it were prey. I forwarded everything to Patricia. Her response came within minutes. "This elevates the case. We can file for corporate fraud. He'll have no room to negotiate now." Later that evening, as I watched the rain fall across the city from my suite window, I felt a strange duality. Exhaustion and empowerment. Grief and triumph entwined like old vines. Dominic's empire of lies had collapsed, but it had left me standing taller. The following week, our company held its first board session without him. Margaret chaired the meeting, Nathan managed operations with mechanical precision, and Sarah presented our newest client acquisition. Every number, every chart, every word reinforced the truth. The company was thriving, not despite the chaos, but because truth had finally been restored. After the meeting, Sarah stopped by my office. "I never told you this," she said, "but before you left, Dominic used to tell us you were losing control, that you couldn't handle the stress. We didn't believe him, but still, He made us doubt for a moment. I met her gaze. That's how people like him win, by making you question what you already know. Don't apologize for it. Just promise you'll never let anyone rewrite your reality again. She nodded, tears shining behind her smile. That night, I moved out of the hotel and into a furnished apartment overlooking the river. It wasn't home yet, just walls and windows and quiet, but it was mine. No echoes of raised voices, no lingering scent of his cologne, no shared past carved into the furniture. I poured myself a glass of wine, opened the balcony doors, and let the city air wash over me. Below, traffic hummed like a heartbeat. Above, clouds drifted across a silver moon. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was beginning. Mornings felt different now. No echo of his voice drifting from another room, no sound of the espresso machine he never learned to use. Just silence. Clean, steady, purposeful. I began to love that silence. It wasn't loneliness anymore, it was ownership. Every day I arrived at the office earlier than the sun. The city below would still be waking, lights flickering in tall buildings, taxis gliding through wet streets, and I'd stand at my window, coffee in hand, watching the skyline that once belonged to both of us. Now it was entirely mine. The press began circling again by the second week. They wanted the story, not the scandal, but the resurrection. Patricia had warned me to tread carefully. Public sympathy is a current, she'd said. You ride it, you don't drown in it. Still, one journalist stood out, Catherine Wells from Forbes, sharp-eyed and famously relentless. She wanted an exclusive. Her email read, "Not about the gossip, about the rebirth. You walked out and within months your company is thriving. That's a story worth telling." When she arrived at the office, she didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Tell me about the night you left," she said, setting her recorder on the table. I looked at the glass walls around us, the same walls that had once reflected Dominic's charm, and smiled faintly. "I left when I realized staying would cost me everything I'd built, including myself," I said. "Sometimes the bravest act of love is choosing yourself." She leaned forward. "And you never thought of revenge?" "No," I said simply. "Revenge keeps you tied to what hurt you. I wanted freedom, not fire." Her article ran a week later under the headline, "The Woman Who Walked Out and Built an Empire." It spread fast. Within days, messages flooded my inbox. Women sharing their stories of betrayal and rebirth, men offering partnership proposals, investors requesting meetings. What Dominic had tried to destroy became the foundation of something larger. When Patricia forwarded the final settlement papers, I signed them without ceremony. Dominic received no share of the company, no claim to assets, no alimony. He was granted his personal belongings and the remnants of his failed ventures, a fair trade for 12 years of my life, I supposed. He didn't appear at the signing. His lawyer handled everything by mail. But a week later, a letter arrived, handwritten, shaky. He apologized in looping sentences, blaming stress, pride, childhood wounds. At the end, he wrote, "Maybe one day I can work with you again. I still believe in what we built." I read it once, then placed it in a folder labeled "Closed." Some stories didn't deserve sequels. By spring, the company was bigger than ever. We expanded into 2 new markets, hired a dozen fresh faces, and opened a satellite office downtown. Nathan proved invaluable, steady, precise, determined to rebuild what he'd helped fracture. I didn't forgive him entirely, not yet, but I began to trust his actions more than his words. The culture of the office shifted too. Meetings became lighter, ideas bolder. Laughter returned to the corridors like sunlight after a long storm. At our quarterly dinner, Sarah raised her glass. "To rebuilding," she said softly, "and to women who don't wait for permission to begin again." The toast rippled through the room, a sound not of celebration, but of collective release. That night, after the last of the wine glasses had been cleared, I stood alone on the balcony overlooking the river. The city lights shimmered across the water, fractured and whole all at once, just like me. A year ago, I would have given anything to keep the illusion of our marriage intact. Now, I understood that some illusions have to burn before truth can breathe. Dominic's name still appeared occasionally in business gossip, whispers of a consulting job gone wrong, rumors of unpaid debts. But each mention grew smaller, dimmer, until he was nothing more than a footnote in the empire he once tried to steal. One afternoon, while reviewing campaign mock-ups, Sarah entered with a hesitant smile. "There's someone waiting in reception," she said. "A young woman. She says your story gave her the courage to leave a toxic partnership, both business and personal." She brought her portfolio. When the woman entered, she reminded me of myself years ago, cautious but burning with quiet fire. "I just wanted to thank you," she said, "for showing me that walking away doesn't mean failure." Her voice trembled, and I saw what I had become. Not a survivor, but a mirror for others to find themselves in. After she left, I sat at my desk for a long time, thinking about the strange symmetry of it all. How destruction had become creation. How leaving had become leading. Outside, the city pulsed with motion. I could almost feel its heartbeat echo through the glass. For the first time, I didn't feel haunted by what I'd lost. I felt anchored by what I'd built, by the unshakable truth that no one could take from me again. And in that moment, I realized something simple and profound. Freedom doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives quietly, on an ordinary day, beneath an ordinary sky, when you finally stop running from your own power. The first summer after the storm arrived golden and warm, as if the universe itself wanted to reward endurance. My calendar overflowed with meetings, interviews, invitations to panels. Every headline carried some version of my story, the woman who walked away and turned ruin into rain. I should have felt triumphant, but success carries its own weight. Each morning, as I looked across the city from my corner office, I wondered what freedom truly meant. The empire was growing faster than ever, but the cost of its foundation still echoed quietly inside me. Patricia called one afternoon. "He's resurfaced," she said, her voice clipped. "Dominic?" "Yes, a startup in Buffalo. Small team, modest funding. He's using his own name this time." I waited for the sharp twist in my chest that used to come with hearing his name. It didn't arrive. Only a strange, distant sympathy. Like remembering a character from a novel you no longer care to finish. Patricia continued. "The investors approached me for background. I told them the truth, professionally, calmly." I smiled faintly. "Thank you." "You don't owe him anger anymore," she said. "You already won." That night, I took myself to dinner. No celebration, no company, just me. The restaurant was one I used to visit with him, though I'd chosen a table near the window this time, not the center where he liked to be seen. The waiter asked if I was waiting for someone. "No," I said, "just waiting for peace." By dessert, I realized peace had already come. It didn't announce itself, it simply arrived, subtle as candlelight, quiet as forgiveness. The next day brought another message from Catherine Wells, the journalist who had written the Forbes feature. Her subject line read, "Follow-up piece? Inside, readers are asking what happened next. How does a woman rebuild not just her career, but her heart?" I laughed softly. The media loved neat arcs, pain, triumph, closure. But life wasn't a clean narrative. It was a series of choices that demanded constant courage. Still, I agreed to meet her again. When Catherine arrived, she looked different. Less interviewer, more confidant. "I've spoken with women who saw themselves in your story," she said. "They're leaving toxic partnerships, renegotiating worth. You've become a symbol." "A symbol," I repeated, almost amused. "I'm just someone who finally stopped apologizing." She smiled. "That's exactly why they listen to you." Her second article focused less on betrayal and more on rebuilding, how leadership rooted in empathy could grow stronger than one built on ego. By the time it published, Morrison Digital had become a case study in resilience for business schools. Invitations arrived from universities, conferences, think tanks. The more I spoke publicly, the more I understood that survival wasn't the end of the story. Not with longing, not with rage, just curiosity. Where does someone go after burning their own kingdom? That question answered itself one rainy afternoon when Nathan entered my office, hesitation written all over his face. "You might not want to see this," he said, placing a printed article on my desk. The headline read, "Former CEO Files for Bankruptcy." Beneath it, a small photograph. Dominic. Thinner, older, standing outside a courthouse. I stared at it for a long time. The man in the picture barely resembled the one I'd married. His once perfect posture had collapsed into defeat, his eyes hollow. The caption mentioned debt, failed ventures, a lawsuit from investors. Nathan cleared his throat. "I thought you should know before the press starts calling." I nodded, folding the paper carefully. "Thank you. Let them call. I have nothing left to say." When he left, I sat back and let the silence stretch around me. It would have been easy to feel satisfaction, to revel in poetic justice, but all I felt was release. He was no longer my villain, just a man consumed by the fire he'd lit himself. That evening I walked along the river. The city hummed with the soft rhythm of dusk. Boats gliding, laughter spilling from rooftop bars, the world carrying on. For years I had measured success in numbers and deals, but that night I measured it in breaths. Calm, unhurried, entirely mine. Somewhere out there, Dominic was probably telling a stranger his version of the story, still searching for an audience. But I no longer needed to correct him. Truth had already chosen its side, and it wasn't his. When I reached the bridge, I stopped to watch the reflections shimmer below. They reminded me of something my mother once said, that sometimes the things meant to break us are only shaping us into who we were always meant to be. I smiled at the thought, feeling the city's heartbeat align with my own. For the first time in years, I wasn't running from the past. I was walking steadily into a future that had room for no ghosts, only growth. Autumn arrived softly, the city dressed in gold and rust. The leaves outside my apartment fluttered like pages turning in a story I had finally learned to read without pain. The company was thriving, investors content, the press still circling my name with fascination. Yet my focus had begun to shift. One afternoon, Sarah entered my office holding a folder. "You should see this," she said. Inside were letters, handwritten, emailed, even printed comments from strangers. Women from every continent writing to say my story had pushed them to act. Some left cruel partnerships. Others asked for guidance on starting again. A few simply wrote thank you for surviving out loud. Reading them, I felt something stir inside me, a pull that wasn't ambition but purpose. For years, my success had been about proving something, that I could outwork, outlast, outshine. But these letters whispered another mission, to make sure no woman ever had to trade her brilliance for someone else's comfort again. That night, I called Catherine Wells. "I'm starting a mentorship fund," I told her. "Small grants for women rebuilding after personal or professional betrayal. Guidance, capital, community, the things I wished someone had offered me." She sounded thrilled. "That's not just philanthropy, Ruby. That's legacy." Within weeks, the Morrison Foundation for Resilience took shape. We launched quietly, without press releases or ceremonies. It wasn't about publicity. It was about creating a network of safety for the dreamers who'd been told they were too much. While the foundation grew, my personal life remained deliberately quiet. I had no interest in romance. Love felt like a foreign country, one I could visit only as an observer. Until one evening, during a late meeting, I noticed Nathan standing by the window, the city's reflection painting his face in fractured light. He had changed. The guilt that once weighed on him had settled into humility. His work was flawless, disciplined, transparent, dependable. He no longer filled silence with apologies. He filled it with competence. "You're working too late again," I said, half teasing. He smiled faintly. "Old habits, but at least I'm working for the right reasons now." "Redemption suits you," I replied. For a long moment we stood quietly. There was no electricity, no unspoken longing, just mutual respect forged in the furnace of shared ruin. Still, something in his eyes carried warmth, a steady kind that made me forget, briefly, how it felt to be betrayed. Weeks passed. The foundation flourished, the company expanded, and life began to feel not just stable, but whole. Then came the invitation. Nathan and Sophie, his fiancée, were getting married at a vineyard outside the city. The card was elegant, cream with gold script. I stared at it for a long time, unsure what I felt. Sophie's name brought a small smile. She had been the one who pushed Nathan to confess, who told him she couldn't marry a man who stayed silent while another woman was being destroyed. If integrity had a face, it was hers. I almost declined, but something in me resisted the idea of hiding from closure. So, on a soft autumn evening, I drove through rolling hills to the vineyard, the air thick with the scent of ripe grapes and late sunlight. The ceremony was simple, sincere. Laughter under white canopies, vows whispered as the horizon blushed. When Nathan saw me, surprise flickered across his expression, followed by quiet gratitude. During the reception, he stood to speak. "I want to thank my wife," he began, voice steady, "for teaching me what courage looks like. And I want to thank someone else, someone who showed me that integrity means choosing the truth, even when it burns. Ruby Morrison is here tonight." Every head turned toward me.
I froze, unsure what to do, until he continued, "She rebuilt her life after people like me helped tear it down. She showed grace when I didn't deserve it. She's the reason I can stand here today as a better man." The applause rose softly at first, then built into something thunderous. Sophie placed her hand on his arm, eyes bright with pride. I lifted my glass in acknowledgement, smiling, not for the praise, but for the peace that came with it. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about forgetting. It was about releasing the past from dictating your future. Later that night, as music drifted under strings of lights, Sophie found me at the edge of the vineyard. "He still feels guilty," she said quietly. "I know," I replied, "but guilt isn't punishment. It's the echo that reminds him to be better." She smiled. "You gave him that chance." "No," I said, gazing at the rows of vines glowing silver in the moonlight. "He took it himself. I just stopped standing in the way of his growth." When I left the vineyard, the road stretched ahead in gentle darkness. The air smelled of rain and renewal. I thought of the younger version of myself, the one who once believed love meant endurance. Now I knew better. Love wasn't endurance. It was honesty, respect, and the courage to walk away when neither could survive. As the city lights appeared in the distance, I realized I had finally reached a place Dominic could never follow, a life not defined by revenge or survival, but by choice. Winter crept in early that year, gentle but persistent. The first frost shimmered across the river one morning as I stood on the balcony, coffee warming my hands. The city below seemed slower, calmer, almost merciful. After years of constant noise, I had learned to appreciate stillness, to let silence speak instead of fearing it. For the first time in forever, my calendar had blank spaces. No urgent meetings, no interviews, no crises demanding my attention. I filled those spaces not with work, but with long walks, quiet reading, and the occasional weekend retreat where no one knew my name. It was strange and beautiful, this rediscovery of ordinariness. One evening, a message arrived from a name I hadn't seen in years. Mom. It was short. "Saw your interview. You sounded strong. Would love to see you if you're ready." My mother had always been a woman of few words, precise, unbending, the kind of strength that feels like cold metal. When I married Dominic, she'd warned me in her quiet way. Charm is cheap. Watch what he does when no one's watching. I hadn't listened. Love had made me arrogant, convinced that my will could reform his weaknesses. So I drove north 2 days later, through quiet roads lined with bare trees, to the small coastal town where I grew up. The house was the same. White shutters, a porch wrapped in ivy. When she opened the door, her hair had turned silver, but her eyes hadn't changed. "You look older," she said, not unkindly. "I feel older." Good. Age without growth is just decay. Inside, the house smelled of cedar and salt, memory itself.
She poured tea, sat opposite me, and studied my face as if reading a long-forgotten map. "I'm proud of you," she said finally. "Not for what you built, for what you left." I stared into the steam rising from my cup. "It took too long to leave." "It always does," she murmured. "We mistake endurance for loyalty, but sometimes endurance is just another name for fear." Her words cut deep because they were true. We talked for hours, about the years we'd lost, the things we'd both avoided saying. When I told her everything Dominic had done, she didn't gasp or cry. She simply nodded. "Men like that don't destroy women," she said softly. "They reveal them. You were strong before him, you just didn't know how much." That night, I slept in my childhood room. The wallpaper had faded, the furniture smaller than I remembered, but the air felt safe.
I woke at dawn to the sound of gulls and waves brushing against the shore. For a long time, I just lay there, letting peace seep into the places ambition never touched. When I returned to the city, I felt lighter. Not reborn, that word belonged to fire and drama, but restored, as if I'd gathered the scattered fragments of myself and put them quietly back in place. At the office, Sarah noticed the difference immediately. "You look happy," she said, almost surprised. "I think I finally stopped carrying ghosts," I replied. The company continued to thrive. The foundation expanded to several cities, mentoring hundreds of women rebuilding their lives. I met them often, artists, coders, designers, single mothers, each one carrying her own version of my story. Sometimes they thanked me, but I always told them the same thing. "You saved yourself. I just lit a lantern." Meanwhile, Dominic's name disappeared completely from business circles. No one mentioned him anymore. His downfall had been absorbed by time, like ink fading on old paper. I didn't celebrate it. Oblivion, I realized, was punishment enough. One weekend in late January, I hosted the Foundation's first winter retreat, a gathering of the women we'd supported. The event took place in a mountain lodge surrounded by snow-dusted pines. Dozens of women arrived, each one a testament to survival. We shared stories beside the fire, laughed, cried, and built plans for the futures we were no longer afraid to claim. At the end of the weekend, one of them, a quiet teacher named Helena, approached me. "I read your story 100 times before I left my husband," she said. "He never hit me, but he made me smaller every day. I used to think smallness was safety. You showed me it wasn't." I held her hand and felt tears rise unexpectedly. Not from sadness, but from recognition. We were all mirrors, reflecting courage back to one another. After everyone left, I stood outside the lodge, watching snowflakes drift under the pale sky. My phone buzzed with another message from my mother. "Proud again, but remember, peace needs maintenance too." I smiled, slipping the phone back into my coat pocket. She was right. Peace wasn't a trophy, it was a practice, something tended, like a garden, day by day. On the drive back to the city, the road curved through quiet hills, the sky streaked with faint pink light. I realized I no longer felt haunted by the past or hungry for the future. I was simply here, present, alive, enough. For a woman who once defined herself by what she achieved, that realization was its own kind of revolution. Spring arrived like a slow exhale, washing the city in light and green. Every morning the river shimmered brighter, every street corner hummed with motion. My company had grown beyond recognition, offices in 2 countries, new partnerships blooming like vines after rain. On paper, it was everything I had once dreamed of. But dreams, I had learned, carried shadows. With success came distance, not just from others, but from myself. Meetings stacked upon meetings, interviews upon interviews. Even peace, when stretched too thin, begins to resemble performance. I began to sense it one morning during a board call. We were discussing expansion into Europe, a deal that could triple revenue. The numbers were dazzling, the opportunity undeniable. But as I watched faces flicker across the screen, Margaret, Nathan, the new investors, I felt a strange hollowness underneath the triumph. After the meeting ended, I sat in the quiet conference room and asked myself a question I hadn't dared voice in years. What if I'm building another cage, only prettier this time? That evening, I went for a walk through the park near my apartment.
The air was soft with rain, the sky heavy with silver clouds. Couples passed, laughing. Street musicians played slow jazz near the fountain. For once, I didn't think about contracts or projections. I just watched the city breathe. The next day, Sarah came into my office carrying a proposal folder thick as a novel. "Europe's ready," she said, excitement shining in her eyes. "This could change everything." I smiled, but she must have seen the hesitation behind it. "Are you not sure?" she asked. "I'm sure it's the right move for the company," I said slowly. "I'm just wondering if it's the right move for me." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "You taught us that growth means more than expansion. Maybe you need to define what growth looks like now." Her words stayed with me long after she left. That night, I opened an old leather notebook, the one I used when the company was just an idea. The pages still smelled faintly of coffee and sleepless ambition. Inside were scribbles of early plans, sketches, hopes. One note caught my eye: "Build something that frees, not confines." I closed the notebook and laughed softly. Even then, I had known the danger. Success, if not guided by purpose, can quietly become its own prison. Over the next few weeks, I traveled to London and Paris to meet potential partners. The cities were vibrant, the meetings productive. Yet everywhere I went, I carried that same quiet unease. The more impressive the rooms became, the less I felt like the woman who once fought for survival in a hotel suite with nothing but courage and a laptop. One evening, after a long day of negotiations, I dined alone at a small cafe tucked in a Paris side street. A soft rain fell outside, painting reflections on the cobblestones. The waiter recognized me from a recent magazine feature and said, "You are the woman who rebuilt her life, yes? The one who left everything behind." I smiled. "That's one way to put it." He poured wine, thoughtful. "Then remember, when you leave something behind, don't start carrying it again in another shape." It struck me harder than any boardroom insight could. When I returned to the hotel, I wrote a letter to myself. Not the CEO, not the survivor, just the woman beneath both. You do not need to keep proving that you're alive. You already are. Let your next chapter be quieter, slower, honest. I tucked the letter into my suitcase and slept without setting an alarm for the first time in months. Back in the city, I met with Nathan and the board. "We're ready for expansion," Margaret said, her tone brisk. "We only need your final approval." I looked around the table, the faces of people who had stood beside me through ruin and rebuild. "Then you'll have it," I said, "but not my constant presence. I'll oversee from a distance for a while. The company deserves growth. I deserve rest." There was silence, then Nathan smiled. "That's the most powerful decision you've made yet." He was right. Power isn't always in taking on more. Sometimes it's in stepping back, in trusting what you've built to stand without you. That summer, the foundation doubled its reach, run by a new team of women who approached leadership with grace and boldness. I visited occasionally, offering advice but never command. Watching them, I saw reflections of myself, only freer. One afternoon, while packing for a brief retreat, I found the old photo from my wedding day buried in a drawer. Dominic's arm around me, both of us smiling for a future that never existed. For a moment, I studied that younger woman. She looked eager, certain, unaware of what awaited her. I didn't pity her. I thanked her. She had walked through fire so I could stand in light. I placed the photo back, not as a wound, but as proof of evolution. That evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, I stood on the balcony with a glass of wine, feeling the wind carry the faint hum of the city. I realized then that happiness wasn't a destination I had reached. It was the ability to stay still and not crave more. The empire I'd built no longer defined me. Peace did. The first month away from the company felt like learning to breathe in a new language. Mornings stretched open, without alarms, without screens lighting up my face before sunrise. I rented a small house by the sea, white walls, wide windows, and the steady rhythm of waves reminding me that time could pass without urgency. At first, the silence was almost unbearable. For years, my identity had been built on movement, deals, deadlines, constant proof of purpose. Without that noise, I felt exposed, stripped of the armor that ambition had crafted around me. The locals quickly grew used to me, the quiet woman with her notebooks and long walks. The grocer saved me the best fruit, the cafe owner learned my order by heart. No one cared about titles or headlines.
They knew me simply as Ruby, the woman who lived near the cliffs and watched the tide every evening. Days blended gently into one another. I woke with the sun, read until noon, wrote until dusk. The sea taught me patience. It moved at its own pace, never rushing, never apologizing. Sometimes I'd stand barefoot on the wet sand and think, this is what peace feels like, unremarkable but absolute. Still, healing has a strange way of stirring old ghosts. Around the 3rd month, I began to dream of Dominic again. Not the man he became, but the one I first fell for. The laugh, the warmth, the illusion of partnership. I'd wake uneasy, wondering if memory was betraying me. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a single act, but an endless one. A choice made each time the past reached for you. One morning, while walking along the cliffs, I met a man painting near the edge. His easel was tilted against the wind, his canvas a blur of sea and sky. He turned and smiled. "You're the woman who walks here every day." "And you're the man who paints the same horizon," I replied. His name was Adrian. He was a landscape artist who lived season to season, following light instead of money. We began to meet often, not by plan, but by rhythm. Sometimes we spoke, sometimes we didn't. He had a way of existing quietly, without demand, as if presence itself were enough. One evening, he asked, "What do you do when you're not walking or reading?" I hesitated. "I used to build things, companies. Now I'm trying to build nothing." He laughed softly. "Maybe that's the hardest thing of all." Weeks turned into months. The edges of my restlessness softened. I stopped checking emails entirely, stopped counting days. I learned to cook slowly, to watch storms roll in without worrying about what they interrupted. My body, once tense with constant striving, began to loosen. Even my breathing felt new. Occasionally, Sarah would call with updates. "Europe is stable," she'd report. "Profits are strong. The team misses you, but they're thriving." I'd smile, pride flickering without possessiveness. The company no longer felt like an extension of me, but like a child who had finally learned to stand on its own. One afternoon, as summer waned, I visited the local library to donate some books. The librarian, an elderly woman with kind eyes, recognized my name. "You're Ruby Morrison," she said quietly. "My granddaughter follows your foundation. She says it changed her life." Her words landed softly but deep. Even here, in this quiet town, echoes of what I'd built reached me. Not fame, resonance. The difference mattered. That night, Adrian joined me for dinner at my house. The windows were open, and the scent of salt and rosemary drifted in. He glanced around the room. Shelves of books, half-filled journals, no trace of corporate life. "You've made this place feel alive," he said. "I think it made me alive," I answered. We ate in silence for a while. Then he said, "You carry peace like someone who's earned it the hard way." "I have," I admitted, "but sometimes peace feels like distance, from who I used to be, from people who once knew me." He nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe that's the point. Distance gives you perspective, not absence." Later, after he left, I stood at the window watching the moonlight shimmer over the waves. For the first time in my life, I didn't crave more. No expansion, no validation, no grand plan. I realized that the woman who once measured her worth by the size of her empire now measured it by the quiet she could sustain without collapsing into fear. As the year folded toward autumn, I received a letter from Sarah, handwritten, elegant. "We're hosting a global summit in your name," it read, "not to celebrate the company, but the movement you began. We'd love you to return, just for one evening." I traced the words with my thumb, feeling a mixture of pride and hesitation. The thought of returning to the world I had left both thrilled and frightened me. Would I still belong there? Or had I outgrown it completely? Outside, the tide drew in again, endless and patient. The sea didn't ask questions, it simply continued. And perhaps, I thought, that's what I needed to do. Continue.
Not as the woman who rebuilt an empire, but as the one who finally learned how to live without walls. The letter from Sarah sat on my desk for 3 days before I touched it again. Every time I looked at it, I felt the sea whispering behind me, patient, persuasive, reminding me that peace wasn't something to leave lightly. Yet part of me knew it was time. You can't stay in the quiet forever. Eventually, the world calls you back to measure what you've become. I packed a single suitcase and left before dawn, driving through mist-soaked roads toward the airport. The city appeared on the horizon hours later, rising out of the haze like an old memory made tangible. Skyscrapers caught the light like mirrors, reflecting a version of myself I almost didn't recognize. The driver glanced back as we entered downtown. "First time visiting?" "No," I said, smiling faintly. "First time returning." The headquarters looked the same from the outside. Polished glass, the familiar silver logo glinting under the sun. Yet, as I stepped through the doors, I felt like a stranger in a place I'd once built brick by invisible brick. Sarah met me in the lobby, her face radiant with pride and nerves. "You look exactly the same," she said. "I feel entirely different." The summit was being held in the new conference hall, a grand space filled with light, greenery, and hundreds of guests. Executives, journalists, young entrepreneurs, women from the foundation, even former colleagues I hadn't seen since the chaos began. When I walked in, the noise softened, not into awkwardness, but into reverence. For a moment, I hesitated, not out of fear, but disbelief. They weren't looking at me the way they once looked at Dominic, with awe or calculation. They looked at me with something quieter, respect. Sarah led me to the stage where a large screen displayed the words "The Morrison Legacy Summit." I laughed softly at the title. "You realize I never wanted my name on anything," she smiled. "That's exactly why it belongs there." As I stepped up to speak, the room settled into silence. The lights warmed my face, the same way they once had during product launches and investor pitches. But this moment felt different. No numbers, no persuasion, only truth. "Years ago," I began, "I thought strength meant never breaking. I believed endurance was love and success was control. But I was wrong. Strength isn't how long you endure, it's how gently you rebuild. Success isn't the noise you make, it's the peace you create." I looked across the crowd, faces of every shade, every story, every battle. We built something extraordinary, but not because we were fearless. We built it because we refused to stay silent. And now the foundation we created is doing what no empire ever could. It's giving freedom back to those who thought they'd lost it. Applause rose, warm and thunderous. But I wasn't seeking it. The words weren't for them. They were for me, the woman who once doubted she'd survive the first night of betrayal. After the speech, people approached in waves. Old colleagues with cautious smiles, young women brimming with hope. Journalists asking about the next chapter. Among them stood Nathan and Sophie, hand in hand. Their presence grounded me, proof that redemption wasn't a myth. Nathan shook my hand, his grip steady. "You did it," he said. "We did it," I replied. Later that evening, as the crowd thinned and the city lights shimmered through the glass walls, I found a quiet corner to breathe. That's when Margaret approached, graceful as ever, her silver hair catching the glow. "You know," she said softly, "this company doesn't feel like a corporation anymore. It feels like a movement." "That was always the goal," I said. "And what's your next one?" I thought about it, looking out at the skyline. The question used to ignite strategy. Now it simply invited reflection. To live without goals for a while, I said. To create without ambition. To exist without proving. She smiled knowingly. "Then you've learned everything the rest of us are still chasing." That night, I returned to the small hotel room Sarah had booked for me. The city buzzed below, alive with its usual rhythm: taxis, sirens, laughter, rain against windows. I watched it all from the balcony, remembering the night years ago when I'd stood in a similar window after leaving Dominic, the world both collapsing and beginning anew. How strange, I thought, that the same skyline could witness both ruin and resurrection, and remain unchanged, as if it always knew I would find my way back. Before sleeping, I called my mother. "I saw the speech," she said before I could speak. "You sounded at peace. I think I finally am." "Then keep it," she whispered. peace doesn't visit twice if you forget to welcome it. When I hung up, I realized that everything she said was true. Peace wasn't a trophy you earned. It was a guest you learned to host every day with patience, humility, and the courage to protect your own silence. As I drifted to sleep, the hum of the city folded into the sound of distant waves in my memory. For the first time, those two worlds, the sea and the skyline, solitude and ambition, no longer felt separate. They belonged to each other, just as both now belong to me. The morning after the summit, the city was draped in gold. From my hotel window, I watched sunlight spill across the glass towers and thought of every version of myself that had stood beneath this same skyline. The naive dreamer, the wounded wife, the relentless builder, the woman who walked away. All of them had fought for this moment, though none of them knew what peace would actually look like once they reached it. Sarah called early. "Everyone's still talking about your speech," she said. "You made half the room cry." I smiled. Good. Maybe they needed to. After we said goodbye, I ordered coffee and sat by the window, not working, not planning, just watching the light change. It struck me that this, the quiet between achievements, was where real living happened. Not in the applause, not in the survival, but in the steady, ordinary rhythm of being enough. Later that day, I visited the Foundation's new office. The walls were covered with photographs, women who had rebuilt their lives through our programs, women whose names I'd never know, but whose courage was stitched invisibly into mine. Each face carried its own kind of triumph. None of them looked victorious in the traditional sense. No crowns, no stages, just eyes full of self-recognition. A young intern approached me nervously. "You're the founder," she said, almost whispering.
"One of them," I replied. She hesitated, then asked, "What made you start all this?" I thought for a moment. Because once, someone tried to convince me I was small, and I believed him for too long. I wanted to make sure no one else ever confused their worth with someone else's approval. The girl nodded slowly, tears brightening her eyes. I needed to hear that. I left soon after, walking through the city with no destination. Everywhere I went, life unfolded. Street vendors calling out, children laughing, people rushing toward places they thought mattered. For the first time, I didn't feel apart from it. I was part of it. By evening, I found myself at the river, where the skyline mirrored itself on the water. The same view I'd once watched from hotel windows when my world was crumbling. I stood there a long time, remembering how far I'd come without realizing that survival itself had turned into art. From behind, I heard a familiar voice. "I thought I might find you here." It was Nathan, older now, more grounded, carrying the kind of calm that comes from knowing who you are. Sophie was beside him, smiling. "We wanted to thank you," she said, "not just for the company, for the second chances you gave all of us." I shook my head. "You gave those to yourselves." Nathan smiled. "Maybe, but sometimes it takes one brave person to give others permission to be better." They left after a few minutes, and I stayed, watching the city's reflection flicker across the water. The air smelled faintly of rain and jasmine. Somewhere nearby, a street musician played a slow tune on the violin, soft, imperfect, beautiful. For the first time in my life, I didn't need to rewrite my story. It no longer felt like something to overcome or explain. It simply existed, whole, scarred, honest. As night settled, I thought of Dominic. Not with anger, not even with pity, just acceptance. He was a chapter I had already read, a necessary shadow that taught me the shape of my own light. I hoped wherever he was, he'd learn something too, even if that lesson came wrapped in silence. When I finally returned to the Sea House weeks later, everything was exactly as I'd left it. The faint scent of salt, the whisper of wind through open windows, the unfinished book on the table. I made tea, sat outside, and watched the horizon shift from blue to silver. There were no more speeches to give, no ghosts to confront, no fires left to put out.
Only the steady rhythm of waves, and within it, the truth I had spent my life searching for. That wholeness isn't the opposite of brokenness. It's what happens when you stop hiding the cracks. I picked up my notebook and wrote one final line. I am not what was done to me. I am what I chose to become after. Then I closed the book, not as an ending, but as a quiet beginning, the kind that doesn't need witnesses, applause, or proof, just presence. As the tide came in, the world around me seemed to breathe, calm, infinite, alive. And for the first time, I knew I had finally come home. If Ruby's rise, from betrayal to brilliance, kept you hooked till the very last line, hit that like button right now. My favorite moment? When she looked straight through Dominic in that grocery aisle. That was pure, quiet power. What about you? Which moment hit you the hardest? Share it in the comments below. And don't miss more stories of strength, justice, and sweet, well-earned redemption. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload.